What I saw, nobody should have saw.
Why not?
He was drunk to the
What do you mean?
correct
Like
point.
the bound volume would not say the same thing what the Watchtower said a few months
That's right.
earlier?
Yes. I found stuff in that office that I have talked about in the past. There, there were assignments to Freddie Franz from Rutherford in the file cabinets
Okay.
and stuff that Freddie Franz wrote in the name, and it was published in the name of Rutherford. Then,
For money?
yes, for money. So the one man was actually making money off of all the chairs that were put in kingdom halls all over the world. Those detective-like investigation of the society's history. I had permission to search offices and file rooms for historical material just about anywhere I chose. So if there was a secret room I couldn't go into, why wasn't I informed of it? That's what I would tell people.
Are you
Yeah,
telling me that people are being judged for reading the apostate books? Some people were literally disfellowshipped. Like my friend was disfellowshipped just because he read the Crisis of Conscience. Like he didn't try to spread it. He didn't give it to anybody else. He just admitted that he read it, and they right away threw a committee at him. And you're telling me that in Bethel, these books are there available for anybody to read?
not everybody in Bethel, everybody in the writing department.
Oh, that's what I asked you. Okay, so everybody in the writing department is able to read them, but
Yes,
average JW that is a cleaner, he cannot go and grab that book and read it.
no.
Welcome back, Barbara. Welcome back. I'm so glad that we get together for the second part. Those of you who have not watched Bart's first part, you can find it in my YouTube channel. This is a second interview that we're doing with Barb because Barb is such a deep well of knowledge of what was happening in the watchtower behind the closed doors. She had access to things nobody else did, except maybe governing body members. And she knew them all at the same time. So she has stories and she has knowledge and she has experience that most of us don't. And we had certain, I would say, idea of what is really happening in Bethel, but unless you actually live there, you don't know what's happening in Bethel. Barbara did. So today we're going to talk about her experience in the writing department and her exit from this. Welcome, Barb.
Thank you, Jack. I'm very happy to be here and I'm very happy to share the information, facts of when I was at headquarters. And this was a long time ago, but that's the time when this organization was at the peak of its power. It was the publishers of the Watchtower, which was the second uh, largest amount of literature in the world at the time. The
That
Watchtower magazine.
before we go on, I wanted to know your opinion about this because you are absolutely right. In the 90s and 2000, early 2000s, they were at the peak. No matter what you wanted, they had it, right? You want magazines, you got the magazines. You want books, no problem. You want a Bible, they'll ask what color do you want the Bible? Do you want small, pocket size? Do you want bigger one? Do you want the reference Bible? No matter what you ask, they had it for you free of charge, nothing everything was, you want tapes, CDs, whatever you want, everything was there. And all of a sudden they're cutting everything and there's no money for nothing. Why do you think that happened?
I'm not sure because I left the organization such a long time ago in 1998.
Yeah,
So,
so you're right, that was the time when everything was accessible, right? Like you just wanted
yeah,
something and they will give it to you, right?
yes, they were very powerful at that time.
All the
But
books were hardcover books, right? It costs money
yes,
to print this stuff and publish
that's
and transport.
second largest publisher in the world. Reader's
Yeah.
Digest was first.
And it was at the beginning, it was slow decline. I noticed they started printing soft cover books, right? But there was still a lot of printing, and then they would cut the books, and they'll say, okay, with brochures, and then there's no more brochures, and then Watchtower would shrink only to half of the pages, and then Awake almost. I think, is there still Awake like once a year or something like that, or
Presently.
it's compared to every 2 weeks, 32 pages. It's nothing right now, right?
Yes.
And yet they're still bleeding money, and they're still saying there's not enough money for this, not enough money for that, and yet
If you
they
read
keep
the
growing, they keep cutting.
magazines, they're not very deep. They don't even try to be uh, deeply informative. It's like they put the same ones over and over out, and then the one new one a year.
When
So,
when you were there, I remember the articles, they had depth. They were
yes, yeah.
they were well written. They had depth. You have to, when you read them, there's somebody that put a lot of hours to prepare them. When I read them right now, like something new that would come out, I'm like, this is for a 15-year-old written by a 17-year-old, and
Written
it's
by
so
AI.
short. There's nothing there. And it's almost like a copy of an old article summarized by AI. I don't know like what's going on, but it's so dumbed down that this new generation that it's coming out, I don't even know to what extent they believe everything, because it's just okay. This is the religion of my parents, type of a thing, right? Like when I
Yes,
was going to service, probably the same thing for you. It was like we had to know all the scriptures that defend, the mortality of the soul, or Trinity, or hellfire, or cross versus stake. We had to memorize all those scriptures and had them down packed. And when we went door to door, we actually discussed those doctrines with people. Not anymore. They're actually told not to discuss anything with people. Just go to Watchtower, to jw.org, and that's it.
was that what we expected? And of course, we expected to be in a new world and perfect. And the organization's far from perfect. And this world is certainly uh, uh, having a lot of issues. So
Right.
it, Armageddon didn't come. People are hanging on for whatever reasons, I guess for community. The general feeling towards the organization is, give or take, or maybe I will or I won't.
Right.
For those that are very angry at the organization because they didn't have what they believed they should have had as a child, and that was for a better education as they grew older. So they're bitter.
Yeah.
I'm not bitter. I had
Neither
a
am I.
interesting young life as a witness because I converted when I was 14. So I did a lot of things on my own as a child. I wasn't told what to do and how to measure up
Yeah.
to their requirements. So, but
So tell me, how was your life in Bethel when but tell us how you got assigned to the writing department. That's I'm very interested with. Tell us that story.
well, I was in the engineering construction department, and I was uh, the administrative assistant to one of the uh, architects. And I've told that story a number of times in the years that have gone by. It was very interesting to me. I was there for 6 years approximately, and they were in the middle of building all kinds of wonderful buildings right there in Brooklyn. They were working on a 30-story building, and approximately when I left Bethel, my husband and I left, he was working on a new building. So it was expansion, expansion. I had a wonderful job in the writing department. I got in there. I'm not sure exactly how, they don't tell you, but I think I got noticed because I revealed a number of things that were wrong in the engineering department. I had a background in cost accounting before I ever came to Bethel. I could do shorthand and typing, and so I was pretty well versed in an office. And so in the engineering department, I did research for them, because that was an area that goes back to the buildings. Some of the buildings go back to the Civil War. That was in the Revolutionary War. The English were battling America's, all that in that area. So it was very historical. So I was invited to do research on the area. You couldn't put a window in a building unless it looked like it was 50, 100 years ago. So they had to do research. I had to be at the libraries and Long Island. It was called it was a historical center where they had a lot of information, or plenty of information, on the years in the past. So I was doing all of that. And then when I discovered that some of the people in the department were cheating the society, and I reported it. Then,
For money?
yes, for money. So the one man was actually making money off of all the chairs that were put in kingdom halls all over the world. Those.
Oh,
So
wow.
he was getting 2%. Society didn't know it, but he sold the job. It was a Canadian company that was making the chairs. And so that's when we had the quick build kingdom halls.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So anyway, he lost his position, and there was a real shakeup in the department. Also, with this great expansion of new buildings, they wanted to do something in the magazines about it. So one day someone came to the, engineering from the writing department and came to see me because of the research I was doing, and asked me to write an article on the expansion. And I did, and it appeared in the magazine. So from there, a little while later, I was told by the overseer, who lost his position because of he didn't he certainly lost control of his people. So then I was told by him that I was being interviewed for the writing department, which was a complete shock to me. And so I went there for an interview and was told that I would begin right away working there. But I think because I did that article, they could see that I had a little bit of writing experience.
Mm.
So but that's how I basically went to the writing department. I don't know what went on behind the scenes discussing myself, but I had a good reputation, and that's what mattered. My husband had a fabulous reputation. That was his second time at Bethel. So we had a son there, and he had a very good reputation. So that I think that those things mattered. We had studied the Bible with many, many families and were aided them to become witnesses. And that matters an awful lot. But we had a lot of time to do that. We were married many, many years before we ever went to Bethel. I was I was 42 when I went to Bethel, and Joe was 47. So we had a lot of experience. Before we went there, Joe was always an overseer. He also was the one who directed the building of kingdom halls or conventions and things like that. So the background fit. And our son went there a year before, and we went to visit him. And immediately, when they found out that Joe was had his own plumbing business, we didn't know, and the entire family didn't know, except for a few people, that they had purchased many old buildings and they had to be remodeled. And then Joe could uh, teach plumbing because we had a lot of plumbing had to be redone in these big buildings. And so he was training people in the plumbing business, sort of, in that occupation. Uh,
And,
we just we just fit at the time. That fit a need, I believe.
yeah, yeah, no, for sure, for sure. I'm sure you were very useful. Barb, I wanted to ask you this. How come they were totally fine with you writing the articles, but we all know women cannot even read the articles in the Kingdom Hall? So during the Watchtower study, there was always a brother reading the Watchtower, and then there's a brother who conducts it, right? So I get that, the guy who conducts it has to be a man because he's the one teaching. But the person who's reading, they're not really teaching. And it was, for example, you wrote the article and yet you were not allowed to read it in front of the congregation. How do they say, okay, it's okay for you to write the articles, but it's not okay for you to read them?
I wondered that myself.
Is it
Uh,
because when you're writing it, it's happening behind the closed doors and nobody can see it and nobody can ask that question? And everybody, like, believe it or not, majority of witnesses probably believe that the governing body is the ones writing the articles because they are the head, right? They're not writing the articles, right? they
I, some of them
I'm
could be
assuming they
very,
have to read those articles and approve those articles before they get printed. Am I correct or no?
well, some of those folk couldn't write articles. They were from other countries and didn't have much education. Some of the original governing body members, the 18 in the 70s, those 18 that were appointed had not much education, some of them, and they were good as far as the organization was concerned. They were spiritual men, but
Right.
they weren't trained as writers. In fact, there was one man, his name was Horowitz, and he attended a nearby congregation. He was a Jew who converted to Jehovah's Witnesses. He attended that congregation for many years, and he was a personal friend of Freddie Franz. And after Freddie died, he came to Bethel to ask about something. He had run the place. I didn't even know who he was until I asked. And if a person came to Bethel, they always had to have somebody assist them, take them on to the floor they want to go to. If they are not part of the Bethel staff, they haven't got free reign. But Horowitz did. And I was very, very surprised at that. And he came in the one day and he was talking with one of the men who was in research, somebody who was I worked with. And he was going on and on about one of the articles that appeared in the magazine. And that was on the Nethinim, the assistance of the governing body. And he said all of that, as far as he was concerned, was not true. He was angry. And so the fellow he was talking to after Horowitz left, he told me about him. And he said he's the one who would explain the certain parts of the Bible, especially the old law. He would always have a part in things that Freddie Franz did, not necessarily all of the writers. As far as myself, when it came to writing something spiritual in an article, like at the end of an article, if it's in the Awake and it's on a ordinary subject that the Awake was famous for, if it had an ending which pointed to a spiritual, change on the earth for the better. I could not write that part. It was actually the editor of The Awake. When I finished my article, I'd give it to him, and he would put it, at that time it was typewriter, and he'd put a sheet of paper in the typewriter, and he said, okay, what is the conclusion that you want in here? And so I had already thought about the conclusion as far as pointing to the new heavens and new earth and the spiritual instructions at the end of the article. So I would tell him, I thinking about rounding it off with a scripture or so, and he'd sit there and pound it out, and so he did the actual work, and I wasn't supposed to be coming up with a spiritual ending, but I did because he asked me to. I was a little confused at the end of that too. That ending for as far as no woman can do that. That was the ending of what I believed, but they had their own ways about them. And who was I to say anything? And I enjoyed what they let me do. And uh, the the Awake editor he had some philosophy that was interesting, and he put in in a booklet that came out, I think it was like in 93, 94. His philosophy was that Jehovah God condemned everybody to death because of what Adam and Eve did. So Jehovah God is going to make it up to the in the new world to everybody, and they're going to get to live forever. And he went on about that. So there was nothing in the scriptures that implied that Job was sorry what he did. But
Yeah.
this is a human idea. And actually, at the time, the booklet, I was assigned to write the booklet. It was going to only be distributed in Chinese. So I worked with a Chinese writer, and so he translated and worked with English, of course. And then it was such an interesting subject. Then they decided to put it in all the languages. So, the Awake editor told me, made a statement to me one day, and then after the assembly, and as I said, we had just left, and we were at one of the big district assemblies in 92. So 93 rather, I have to correct that. And I was reading the booklet. It was a big one like that. They switched from those little ones. And we were in the car going home, and I was reading it, and then I saw the Awake editor's philosophy in there. How he got that in there. But see, you give people an opportunity to express how their beliefs, and these people at headquarters, they take a lot for granted, I think, but they're used to that. The Wake editor been in Bethel when I was there 40 years. They get used to doing their own thing as long as the governing body agrees. In that article, that booklet had to be approved by at least 3 in the writing department, governing body members. So that gives you a little idea, but I didn't understand a lot of things because of the makeup of the writing department, because they were, due to the changes in the world, they were constantly changing. They had standards for writing literature, and you had to meet those standards, but then they would change their standards with the demands that culture makes, if you understand what I'm saying.
Well, I know
So,
they're changing obviously the pictures, like the pictures. Let's say for people in Africa, they would use black people, and then for people in Europe or United States, they would use white people, right? And they would also adopt to the culture of the people who are recipients. So, if somebody lives in Africa, for example, they wouldn't use example of elevator because a lot of people don't know what elevator is, right? But in our world, we know, so they would adopt these things, right? Depending on the culture or language or skin color that they're trying to write to, right? That's what I've heard, right?
well, all I know is that at the time that the writers are assigned, I mean, they're writing, they have a book of standards to meet. Now, if a and most companies, publishing houses have standards, and but they change, and so the writer has to be sure that they
Meets with the
can.
current standard, right? Yeah.
And so it goes through three hands. The writing department has three governing body members, and but sometimes things get through because they're out of town doing a special.
So, if I understand this correctly, like for example, you would write an article, and then three governing body members would have to read it and approve it before it gets printed. That was the standard.
17 hands before it gets printed is from the beginning of the assignment. It goes through 17 hands, or it
17
did.
hands.
I don't know anything about it today because the articles apparently are so simple and AI is really involved in it. You can
Yeah.
appreciate it. So, uh, but back then, um, there were some mistakes that got through at times, and then because of it, then there was a new rule that would come out. So that one article that said that everything would be over by the year 2000, just a statement attached in other information. And that caused such a big problem. And they said, never, never, ever say anything like that. That
Well,
worldwide,
I remember specifically, they didn't say year 2000, but they very often would say in the 20th century. So all
yes,
those signs and prophecies are gonna be fulfilled in the 20th century, or we see the fulfillment of them in the 20th century. I think many times that expression was used in the Revelation book, and then they had to update this. First they
yes.
gave us an insert, and then they changed the book completely, right?
They
Because
also changed
everybody
that.
believed that in the 20th century all the prophecies will be fulfilled.
Well, the bound volume would be changed. What appeared in the bound volumes at the end of the year or the next year for the past year, that would be changed to the
What do you mean?
correct
Like
one.
the bound volume would not say the same thing what the Watchtower said a few months
That's right.
earlier?
Yes. But we wouldn't be notified. Everybody in the writing department at the end of a month, everybody got a sheet of paper that had all the information on changes and things like that. We were all informed. It's a complex department. It used to be very complex, I have to say. I can't speak for the present, but there were wonderful things about the organization, whether you want to believe it or not. And then there were silly things in the organization because it was made up of at that time when I was there, 3,000 people, and you had a lot of people in charge of a lot of different departments, and they did rules, change rules for their own department, unless it was a spiritual thing. No, that's an entirely different story.
Hmm.
So, for instance, an article I wrote, I worked on it and with one of the senior writers on women, um, respect for women. Uh, we found a policy statement from a few years before, and I found that it's absolutely said that no one is a woman's head except her husband, and that's only in spiritual matters. And that was in another magazine of a few years before. And so that was policy. So we put it in the article on respect for women. And it was noted in the article. And then there was an entire footnote, and it said where it was taken from. If we had come up with it, that would have had to go through a lot of hands to get a statement like that approved, but it had been approved a few years before. So there were rules, and I understood those rules. And the thing is that because of the results of some of the ideas at headquarters didn't turn out to be exactly positive, there are some people that think the whole organization didn't operate properly, but it did operate properly. Of course, there were glitches, but overall, it was a peaceful place. It wasn't a lot of wrangling. There were certain rules, and like I read one not too long ago that on another interview, which absolutely said that the writing department was the one who came up with the rules, and they had the final say. But it was publishing, which we all thought, I did many years ago, that publishing was the final say. But publishing only puts out there what writing says in the literature, or in it necessarily literature, but maybe in a book, or maybe two elders. Its writing department is really the final say. They come up with the approval of the adoption of the subject. It's complex, but it's years and years in the making through all kinds of complexities of publishing. It is a publishing house. Maybe we don't understand everything about it until we get in there and see. It wasn't a lot of confusion that I could see, but there was a general idiosyncrasies of people. But then as the organization changed in the 90s, I have the generation teaching. I have no idea why I was, in effect, still working for the organization. When I left in 92, I still was working for them. And most people that I know, I've never said that to them. I never told them. But I have a letter at home that's just the approval of what I was to do for my home. I wrote 2 major articles here from the house in those 4 years that I worked here. I did a lot of research for other writers, saved them a lot of time. They could write because they would tell me what they wanted in research. So that was different. I never knew of a woman, but there were articles that were written by women. I mean, there was some articles like on the Awake on Butterflies that was written by a woman. So we can't say that they didn't write. There were different men who had on their list, as some of these women were school teachers or graduates of universities. But the articles were not the spiritual articles or new teachings. Now, if you had a new teaching, you had to run it through. If I had a new idea, I had to run it through all kinds of people for approval. So generally,
here's my question. There is tons of letters of people who are writing to the society with questions about the doctrines and why they disagree with it. How do they react to it? Because I believed all the doctrines simply because I didn't know anything better. I didn't know another point of view. So accept what they teach you because you have nothing to compare it with. But they're constantly exposed to so-called apostate teachings, and people who have different opinions. But because before somebody becomes an apostate, he's just a regular brother who has questions, right? And those questions are being asked in the letters. How do they respond to that? Because what I've heard is that they write a letter, and the letter right now, they don't even answer letters. They just forward those letters to the elders in the congregation that the brother is asking the questions from, and the elders have to respond to those questions. Is that how it was when you were there?
There's a lot of leeway for that type of thing. It's not always one way. There are people who ask legitimate questions and they get an answer from writing correspondence. The 5 men, when I was there writing correspondence, were very, very smart men and knew the society's rules inside out. And sometimes they would take on a newer topic that hasn't been explored. It would have to then go through the writing department of the three governing body members. So there's rules for everything. It's a very complex organization. I've read actually some of the letters written by writing correspondents because some people who eventually left the organization shared their letters that they received. I've read a letter that had new thoughts about Russell that I had never heard before. Somebody was doing research on a question, and they quoted something that out of Russell's writings. So there is leeway for change, but remember this: these changes have to do with policy, not doctrine.
Oh, I see. Well,
Policy
that's
and
what I wanted to ask you. If there was ever any change due to somebody writing a letter saying,
oh
"Hey,
yes,
you guys have this wrong."
oh yes.
Can you give me an example?
They add on to. Oh, I couldn't think of any myself, but I know that they have done that. It's been so many years and so many different topics that there's. Uh, um, I know I've seen them. You're warning me ahead of time. I can get into my files. I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters and files and see what I have over the past 30 years. This stuff has been sitting there. I
In
have some out of Canada that are very interesting that changed policy.
in that
But
case, do you think it's
you
worth
gotta
it
understand,
to
I hate
write
to
to
interrupt
them?
you, but I absolutely, you have to understand, everybody has to understand this. It also is the way that other religions operate. They don't change doctrine, they change policy.
Policy, right?
Doctrine was uh, immortality of the human soul, Trinity, and hellfire. That's doctrine.
Yeah,
Ransom is the fourth part that Jehovah's Witnesses have as part of their doctrine, but
right.
almost everything else is policies, and
Just the
that's why it's
policy.
so easily to change. Even the generation thought, but when it comes to those major four uh, um, subjects, they don't touch those. And how I found out a little more about that is I went to the Catholic Church and did some research, and that is exactly what they do. Doctrines of the Catholic Church do not change. Everything else, for instance, when I was a Catholic girl, our family couldn't have meat on Friday.
Yeah,
Well, that was specifically mentioned in the article that I was reading about the church's doctrine. That's not a doctrine. That's how they got rid of it. It wasn't ever a doctrine. These things make a difference. What that you never stop to think about until you get in a situation that you start. I was learning all the time.
right.
It was very, very interesting to me.
Barb, you sent me a whole bunch of articles. I want to touch upon them, and maybe we'll display them. Which one you wanted to share?
Well, you know what? I wanted to share something that is coarse. It's not, it's You'll see. It was sent to me by the Awake editor after I left Bethel.
That's a
And
poem?
well, it's sort of a essay, sort of little, it's very short.
Okay, go
It
ahead.
says a lot about uh, being in Bethel.
Okay.
If you put up with me, I don't normally talk like this, but when I received it, Joe and I received it, we had to laugh because it was so true. And so they're words of advice. And the man who sent them to us, he had a very high position at Bethel. And so if you want to succeed in life, if you're unhappy, you got to follow this advice, okay? It says, if you are unhappy, that's the title. Once upon a time, there was a non-conforming sparrow who decided not to fly south for the winter. However, soon the weather turned so cold that he reluctantly started to fly south. In a short time, ice began to form on his wings, and he fell to the earth in a barnyard, almost frozen. A cow passed by and crapped on the little sparrow. The sparrow thought it was the end, but the manure warmed him and defrosted his wings. Warm and happy, able to breathe, he started to sing. Just then a large cat came by, and hearing the chirping, investigated the sounds. The cat cleared away the manure, found the chirping bird, and promptly ate him. The moral of this story is this.
That's got to be
Remember,
a good one.
number one, everyone who craps on you is not necessarily your enemy. Number two, everyone who gets you out of the crap is not necessarily your friend. Number three, and if you're warm and happy in a pile of crap, keep your mouth shut.
So that's supposed to represent life in Bethel.
That's life in Bethel. Uh-huh. It says so much, right there. You think of all of these
But
examples.
you're absolutely right when you think about it, right? You start saying too much, somebody's gonna come and snatch you out of it.
That's
Uh,
right. You're,
stay nice and warm and quiet. It doesn't matter that you're in a pile of crap.
yeah. So you got a lot of things going on around you. Just
That's
don't get
funny.
involved in it. And so when I was introduced around to everybody in the writing department by a young woman who was with the department, and one of the senior writers told me, he said, Barbara, you should be thrilled you're in the writing department. I said, I am. He said, people who come to Bethel, they would kill to be in the writing department. And I smiled and I laughed at him. And he said, I'm serious. They would kill to be in the writing department. He said a lot. You know, that's people. I'm not saying that they're all killers. It's an example of think about this. Just think.
Yeah.
Well, I had some experiences in the writing department right away, and I'm going to share that in a few minutes. And to prove this point, that if you want something bad enough, even if you're a dedicated uh, Jehovah's Witness and you love it, you love this, you believe it, those very same people can cause injury.
Hmm.
So, it's just the way it is. We're all so different and we look at things differently. But I have some things I want to share about the internal affairs of the writing department. It is lengthy. Just
Which
break
one
in.
is it? The two of Barb R. Anderson's Bethel Writing Department experiences? That one?
That's right.
Okay, I'm gonna post it here. Hold on a second so we can all
That's
see it.
the internal affairs of the writing department. I was there. I saw the internal.
Oh, sorry. Wrong page.
I saw the good, I saw the bad, and I also saw my own phobias and stuff. You know,
Hmm.
you get into different situations.
Okay, so this is this one, right?
Yes. So I wrote all this out years ago, and it's just as true as could be. I gave it a lot of thought then. I have many experiences that I wrote out over the years because I knew I would forget and I didn't want to. So when I was working in Brooklyn, Bethel's writing department, the writing department's library, under the control of librarian and senior writer Gene Smalley and his secretary assistant Sarah Hall, was located on the 8th floor of the 25 Columbia Heights office building. In those years, all those wonderful buildings, of course, were sold, and but back then they were very beautiful buildings. My office was also on the same floor, although at the East River end of the building. I overlooked the East River. I was on the 8th floor. A lobby and an elevator shaft was located in the center of each immense floor in the building, which could be said to have divided all the floors in half as far as square feet. So this was a pharmaceutical company at one time, and the floors were huge, the square feet of the floors. So not all of the one building was finished for use by the staff. So they're kind of empty, but in the major building, the 25 building, everything was used in that building as far as I know of. The library was we're talking about the writing library, the writing department
Yep.
library, and located in the center part of the other end of the 8th floor, with some staff's private offices located around the library. It seems to me now that there were about 8 to 10 average size offices on each side of the library, along with the Carl Klein, a governing body member. He had a very large office on one side of the library. Remember, this is the writing department's
Yeah.
library. It seemed huge, but I have no idea how many books were there or how many square feet the area consisted of. The use of the library was confined to the writing department, okay, art department, and graphics. The art department and graphics, those two departments fell under the control of writing. If Bethel is not connected, and I'm pretty sure it's still that way, if Bethel is not connected with these departments wanted to use the library for research, they had to have special permission to do so. Otherwise, it was off limits. Special tours could be arranged. This is information that still is in the way it is. So you just had to follow the rules. The special tours could be arranged by staff to bring your friends and relatives into the writing department. It wasn't on the tour list, only if you had you were with the writing department and you wanted to bring somebody in. And in the almost 4 years I was in the department, I brought in quite a number of visitors and showed them interesting items on the shelves and told them how the department operated. There was no prohibition against taking pictures. In fact, many visitors in my tours took pictures. As far as I know, every publication published by the Westchester Society could be found in the writing department's library. In addition, now this is interesting here. In addition, there were hundreds of books not published by the Society, such as Bible commentaries, galore, plenty of them, and rows of shelves containing old and new books about religion, Bible history, and archaeology. Included were also books about current events. I wrote this. I was in seventh heaven in that library. I really was. As far as commentaries, that was a major issue in this organization not to use Bible commentaries, and yet the writers were using Bible commentaries. They changed that way later on, but initially, no. Now, you couldn't use a commentary. Maybe you could. I found that I could do pretty good when I could have very specific commentaries and then compare them with each other, especially on commentaries about Jewish commentaries. I really, really appreciated them. So in the past, some former Jehovah's Witnesses claimed there was a, now I'm going to talk a bit about this because I heard about this over and over again, that there was it was a rumor that there was a secret room in the writing department where Watchtower's secret books were hidden. Like Watchtower had secret books. What kind of books? I don't know. But the rumor was not true. If you heard of this, be assured of its fallacy. So, since I was researching for the compilation of a history book, that was the Proclaimers book, I was given unlimited opportunity to go anywhere in the Bethel complex and talk to anybody about the society's history. So there's no reason to suppose that there were hidden and secret books. If there were, I believe I would have found them or heard about them during my 3 years working on that assignment. Because there wasn't such a place. One of the assignments from my overseer of the Proclaimers book, that was Carl Adams. There were the three Adams brothers, and they were you had one in the service department, and then you had another one who was president of the Watchtower of New York. Oh no, not New. No, I believe Pennsylvania. I'm sure. Sorry, and so. One of the assignments from my overseer, Carl Adams, was to list every publication which J.F. Rutherford wrote, which I did because I had access to every book the Society published. Carl wanted a fresh look at the number and names of Rutherford's books, and so I did not use a previously published list. All my assignments involved the Society's publications in some way or the other. So how could I have done my job if all the books were not available for me to see? I remember there was a storage closet. I was very interested in that closet. It was located at the end of the 8th floor where my office was, that contained only apostate books. So they weren't secret. Every apostate book that was available, people could buy. There was a copy in that closet. So the writers it wasn't hidden from them what was being said about the organization.
But for writing department only, like average JW that was in Bethel, I don't know, a cleaner, were they able to go there and read those books?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Oh wow, that's
We
very surprising.
discussed
So
it.
wait a
Some,
minute. Are you
yeah,
telling me that people are being judged for reading the apostate books? Some people were literally disfellowshipped. Like my friend was disfellowshipped just because he read the Crisis of Conscience. Like he didn't try to spread it. He didn't give it to anybody else. He just admitted that he read it, and they right away threw a committee at him. And you're telling me that in Bethel, these books are there available for anybody to read?
not everybody in Bethel, everybody in the writing department.
Oh, that's what I asked you. Okay, so everybody in the writing department is able to read them, but
Yes,
average JW that is a cleaner, he cannot go and grab that book and read it.
no.
No, okay.
In
Still,
fact,
the fact that the books are there available for the writing department to read.
well, they had to know, I had to know what was being said about it before you dealt with it. There was a question that came up at one point where the ministers in certain churches in LA were going door to door and telling people. When I say door to door, I mean in their church. So they're going to the houses of their congregants, and they were telling them about Jehovah's Witnesses were the false prophet. And so some people who were witnesses in California called Bethel to tell them about that. So one of the writers was discussing that with, was sitting talking in his office about this situation. So he said he was going to write an article on it. And since I was so active in the house to house work in the years past, they were interested in what I had to say. It wasn't that male or female, that didn't matter. That we're just interested in people's ideas because that was a very strange experience. And so we were interested in what was going on the outside against the organization. Oh, I could talk a lot on that too. This is a never ending
Yeah,
information. The article, because the organization was made up of so many people and there were so many different kinds of people.
I get
And
it, but I think what we're interested with is that question of who had access to the so-called apostate books, what kind of apostate books were there,
well,
and did it affect anybody?
so they would, if they were dealing with some particular subject, and that they would want to know what the book that was against the organization had to say, because I want to look at both sides of it. So I know I did. I wanted to hear what they had to say. I did a thing. I was given an article that was written by someone in another country in English, and I think it was England, if I remember correctly. And there were some things in there that I didn't think was true. So I did research on that, and I found that I found a difference. I found something that was way different than the writer who was a J.W. Elder at the branch had to say in his article, because some of the branches had writers that they had to submit an article. There was a time that they had to, still today they do that. So I found some things that was very, very important that I looked up, and and I had to discuss it with the Awake editor, and it had to do with abortion. And so the article had incorrect information. I went and looked it up, and we straightened that out in the article. So we tried. So
Hmm.
there again, that was a article that was not necessarily doctrine. I mean, it is a big doctrine in a lot of Christian religions, uh, that subject, but
Yes.
not in Joe's, when she very rarely even discussed such a things. So um, I don't know, as long as
I
uh,
mean, things are changing all the time. Since the last time we spoke, another thing changed was the blood issue, right? Whether you can store blood or not. That just
yes,
changed recently, right?
yes,
So it's always things changing. I'm happy about the changes because less and less restrictions and these people can start living normally. But some people are very bitter about it. But I'm like,
yes, they are, and
this is
that's
what we wanted for crying out loud. This is what we've been trying to say. Hey, let these people live normally and make their own decisions. And when it's happening, then people are bitter. I'm like, you shouldn't be bitter. You should celebrate that going forward, at least these people don't have to deal with it, and the new generation doesn't have to deal with it. Anyways, let's go back. You want to go back to the
yeah.
article?
I can do it from here. You don't if you don't want to put on screen, I got it in
Okay,
front
go
of
ahead.
me. I said, this is a little bit newsy, and those I didn't spend much time reading opposition books. Uh, at the time, I was too busy to read any. Also, I was not interested in them because I believe the books were filled with lies about Jehovah's Organization. So see
Yeah,
all that. It's a difference, you know. But back then, located all around the Bethel homes were small libraries. So I appreciated them. Single Bethelites sometimes they wanted to do their research in the evening because they had a talk coming up or something. And so in the homes, they every so often on different floors, they would have a small library there, staffed with there were a couch maybe and a few chairs. And the bookshelves would contain all 7 volumes of the reprints of the Watchtower journals from 1879 and 1919. The Watchtower books and other books that Gene Smalley, the librarian, thought was important that Bethelites might need for personal research were put there. But I understand they didn't do that. A few years after I left Bethel, they didn't do that anymore. Maybe they do it now. I don't know. And all the time I was in the writing department, I never heard of a hidden library, but there was an archival storage area that I couldn't go in there, and that the librarian and his secretary. And if I needed something there, I just would ask. You know, what happens after the internet came on the scene, the computer world? Well, nowadays, all the Watchtower archive is digitalized, and the writers and researchers use their computers to find out what's available for them to check out or actually read on their computers. They don't have to ask for a book. They can go in there. The Bethel library is all digitalized. I know that for a fact because I saw material from it and pictures from it only about a month ago. So it was neat. They were very, very well done. The way that for the writers, how they use the computers, terrific. I wish I had that back then. Now, in the there was the off limits archival area. What was in there? Well, all the letters that Charles Taze Russell wrote on a particular subject. If I wanted to see it, I would ask for it. See there, you can do it yourself because that's all on there on the computer. The Russell divorce court trial transcript was there, and I asked to see that. The appeals of the divorce, five appeals Russell filed, and Rutherford and the Society's private papers, which had something to do with the Watchtower director's sedition trial, which took place in 1918. I could ask for that, and I did. Anything to do with the photodrama creation they had, I could see that, but it was signed out to me, and this was another thing. I talked about the newspapers a few weeks ago on another interview. I saw the papers that they had, and I explained what that was. I had a lot of comments on that. And the society would write the articles, give them to the newspapers. They would put a newspaper together like the New York News and have a special edition that was just sold, put out there around the Yankee Stadium. And we thought that all of the New York News had the same articles about our convention, but it was only the newspapers around the convention sites that had that special New York News, which featured the assembly. So I saw some of those there. And so I explained that. But there is another one that was so interesting to me, and I didn't explain. And that was concerning the union papers. And that was, they published a 1-page newspaper-sized tract, which was handed to people outside of conventions. Absolutely. Some of these large pamphlets also look like newspapers or large advertisements. Yes. And it was intended Um, well, they weren't free. Uh, Generally speaking, were 7 cents. But the one that I didn't talk about was a appeared like a union labor newspaper. And I actually have a copy of it, and I couldn't find it for tonight. But
Oh,
that was handed out like you had a man in Manhattan, a witness in Manhattan, standing in front of a store. This is an example. And he would just hand us free paper out. And everything about it looked like it was released by the union because that was a big deal in some part of our culture. And the unions were fighting the blue collar workers and the white collar workers, and they're all union stuff. So they put out a labor union newspaper, and that people thought that's what they were getting. And but you had to look really close, and you found out that it was announcing the kingdom, and that was the only hope of mankind. And there was many of those papers produced. If I ever run across the one I have, I will certainly let you know, and you can show it.
yeah, I'd like
Uh,
to see it.
so there was a lot of things that witnesses were doing to announce the kingdom, more so than we ever realized. But a lot of things were a little bit of deceit, you know. They do anything to get their message out, even though they crossed over a line, I felt. Um, if we wanted any books, certain books at that time, and I would think those same things are on the internet now, but I don't know how that operates. But back then, if we wanted a certain book for research, we would tell one person, and he went every Wednesday to the 42nd Street Library, the big, huge library, and he'd fill the orders of the writing staff. Now, here goes something different. Don Cummers, he was a one-time circuit overseer. He was invited to Bethel in the 70s by Milton Henschel, governing body member, and he became an assistant in the office complex building office. So all these complexes to do with the offices, there were two people that were the real directors of that, and one was Vern Weisgarver. He was the head of all of fixing, putting whatever was needed in offices, and made sure that they were up to snuff, that like an office should be. So he managed that for decades, and so in the 25 major office building was the 25 building, 25 Columbia Heights. And they had to furnish all those offices, change furniture depending. It was a big, important part of the Bethel. And Vern and Cummers, they would, especially Cummers and his crew, and they would attend auctions. So it wasn't so much spiritual. They were attending these big auctions, and they bought or they bid on furniture. The Watchtower repaired it when they brought it back from wherever they got it. And when the Watchtower inherited property or estates, Don Cummins was involved with that. If they'd find any old Watchtower literature at some of the places that the Watchtower was a beneficiary in a will, they would bring that back. So the 30 building actually was stored in it, was a storage area for all of that kind of thing. And people would be surprised what would be in there. And one time Don told me about what was in, he said he knew that I was doing research. And so he said, you need to go into, and he gave me the floor number and everything. And I go into this humongous floor with hardly anything in it, but some piled up furniture, desks and things like that. And I start going through those desks, and what do you know? There was stuff in it. When they moved those desks, when they bought that place, they moved a lot of furniture out of the other place where it was uh, the the original 24 Beach, 124 Columbia Heights, and they moved a lot of those offices and established it down at the 25 building. So you never knew it was there. I found stuff in there that was so interesting. I saw pictures of Rutherford. What I saw, nobody should have saw.
Why not?
He was drunk.
You
He
saw
was
Rutherford drunk?
really drunk. Rutherford. He was in a bathing suit. There was about 6 pictures there in this one old desk. And I took him to the art department and gave it to them. I didn't know what to do with them. I should have kept them. I would have been something to show us.
That is for
Everybody.
sure.
One picture was him sticking his tongue out into the camera right up to the thing. You knew he was drunk, and he was a heavy drinker. So there's no debate about that.
Rutherford.
You should have seen the bathing suit he had on. He had a one-piece bathing suit, and he had a big belly. That was fun. I was appalled. So, but anyway, I was a good girl. I delivered them to the art department, and
I guess they didn't put it in the watchtower, did they?
but I got a memory. I can see it.
Oh, I believe it. It's kind of hard to forget these kind of pictures.
Oh my goodness. Well, anyway, they had a place that they were where they put all this stuff. Then there was another floor that now that was very different. It There was wooden shelves, just raw wood, shelves and shelves and shelves, and that's where they would when they get so much of this stuff from when they inherit homes of ex-witnesses. So what are they going to do with all that? So yeah, there was sets and sets of Watchtower reprints, sets of Millennial Dawn and Studies in the Scriptures, Rutherford's Rainbow Series books, Russell and Rutherford wax records, old record players, anything else connected with the early activities of religion. There was a large basket filled with cross and crown pins, plus other miscellaneous items that the Bible students wore or used, such as little books, which they filled with names of other Bible students and their birth dates, plus cards with Bible texts that they would send to each other. Don Cummins once showed me a 2-inch by 2-inch Bible. It literally was 2 by 2, and it had every book in that Bible. It was you couldn't hardly read it, but it was legit. And he claimed it belonged to Russell. And he told me he had a large private collection himself of personal Russell and Rutherford letters that he obtained through estates being willed to the Watchtower. He also, I heard years later, that there were so many TVs that they would bring in from people's houses because he inherited the whole house. And every so often you'd hear about somebody buying one of those at Bethel. So they had kind of a little business on the side. I don't want to say anything bad because I don't really know. It's just what I heard.
Mhm.
So, but what were they going to do with it? As long as they put the money in the for the Watchtower Society, that would be fine. But if they kept the money to themselves, that's how we felt back then. That wouldn't be right. Okay. Now that's the layout. Now this is I get into something that was appalling to me. There was one small organizational booklet that had been printed and sent to every congregation in the early 1920s, which was on the list of all Watchtower publications printed. Yet the booklet could not be found anywhere, not in the writing department's library or their archival storage room. I don't even recall the name of the booklet. But my first assignment, when I was that day, that one day, I reported to the writing department. My assignment uh, was given to me, and that was my first assignment to try to find a copy of it. What now? Now you're going to hear how life not necessarily was all that happy for me.
Okay.
Okay. One of the writing department staff was a young, very attractive woman. She was assigned to show me around the department and its library on my first workday. She's the one that took me to every office, introduced me to everybody on the floor. After being introduced to everybody in the department, she and I looked at the sheet of paper that she was carrying, that Carla Adams, the overseer of the project, and it had my assignment for a week. And the number one thing was to locate that missing organizational booklet. Her suggestion was that I go to the closed up, locked, large office of Freddie Franz, located on the 9th floor where the art department was. There, she suggested that booklet might be found somewhere in his huge library within this huge office. I obtained the office key from the 9th floor receptionist, and upon entering the office, I opened the drapes and then proceeded to pull every book off of the shelves, looking for the missing booklet, but it wasn't there. At the time, Franz no longer came to work because of being totally blind and very, very feeble. He was confined to a room on the infirmary floor located in the Towers building. Anyway, the next day, Carl Adams, my overseer on the Proclaimers Project, called me into his office and scolded me for going into Franz's office. He told me with much annoyance in his voice, and I can remember it to this day. He was really annoyed, and that I had no business there. But I explained that the woman who he assigned to show me around writing and his library on my first day in the department, she directed me to Franz's office to look for the booklet, which might have been hidden in all of the books on the shelves. And that was a really interesting time for me in that office. I was in there for hours. I found stuff in that office that I have talked about in the past. There were assignments to Freddie Franz from Rutherford in the file cabinets,
Okay.
and stuff that Freddie Franz wrote in the name, and it was published in the name of Rutherford. And so that was very different. So it shows you what Freddie was doing. Truly, he was the oracle going back to the 20s. He was there at Bethel in the 20s. And so Rutherford, who took over from, from when Russell died in 1916, then they had a kind of a fussy fight over who was going to take over after that. I think Freddie Franz came into headquarters in 1920, and I think he started the service department like in 24. I know I'm very close. I have
So what I understand from this, you're saying that Freddie had a huge influence since the 20s on the organization because even his ideas were presented as Rutherford's ideas.
That's exactly right. I'm not saying he wrote all of Rutherford's books back then, but I'm saying what I was reading.
Well, the
And
Raymond Friends was very highly speaking about Fred. He said that Fred was very intelligent. He spoke very good Spanish, and he basically translated the whole Bible mostly by himself. So he must have been quite a scholar, right? Quite knowledgeable man.
Well, Horowitz was really the translator for Freddie France, and there was a lot of discussion on certain things. Freddie used Horowitz. That is a well-known secret. It, it, it was very surprising to me. In fact, Horowitz, that day that I met him and saw him there, and he was so angry, eventually he left the organization. He just, once Freddie was gone, he just kind of disappeared. So
Who was that?
the one I mentioned in the beginning, the Jewish man, Horowitz, who
Horowitz.
came
Okay.
to the writing department. He could go anywhere he wanted, and because he was so affiliated with Freddie France for years and years. So a lot of Freddie's ideas, when I was going through his books in his office, and I want to tell you, there were hundreds and hundreds of books. There were so many books in there that were to do with the Puritans and the millenarian movement that he adopted for Jehovah's Witnesses. That's why I call this a rerun religion. It's so much of it comes out of the Puritans, 14th and 16th century. Changes a little here and there, and they by others, and then you had numbers of people trying to figure out when Jesus was coming again. So that was a big deal. I also picked up a lot of stuff from everybody else. Came in from England. In my own personal research, I know that. But I found so much material that in his office, and nobody can take that away from me. I saw it. I have some of the books I bought those books, some of those books, just to see what they said that he had in there. And he's quote at an assembly, and I heard him, and he would quote and as new truths, and I would find that where he quoted that, I have the books that he quoted from, and not the original, but books on the Puritan movements and the ins and outs of all of that. And I remember at one assembly, he was quoting, he was saying a statement which I mentioned on another interview. And I found that in one of the books that I have, that is, I bought it years later because I had marked down what some of the stuff Freddie had in there. A lot of the things he came out with was not original. So he was an interesting sort. I could talk all night on him, but I won't.
No, we're already stretching this one.
I want to talk about this. So when I went into that his office,
Yes.
on that project, Carl Adams scolded me for being there. I explained how come I was there. I didn't know anything. She told me to go there. And so he didn't say anything to me at all other than scolding me for going in there. So the young woman that told me to do this, her picture, she was well known. She's a very, very attractive young lady. Her picture had been on the front and back cover of both the Watch, Her and the Wake over a number of years. At one time or the other, she had a beautiful office in the writing department. She was one of, now this isn't new information. There were 50 Bethelites working on the Insight books, the two books that made up the Insight. And she was one of them. From wherever she was before, it took a few years to do the Insight. But after it was over, then they went back to their own departments. This was people who were super intelligent and were borrowed to work on the Insight books. You know, we all have who years ago, we all had the inside books, and you could see the massive amount of work that went in there. 50 people were assigned on them. So she was so good at her job, they kept her in writing. And so she did miscellaneous important work, but it was flunky work for the writers, such as getting certain articles and something like that. Well, anyway, it took me a year to find out what she was up to. And so I found out that Debbie was so angry that I had been assigned to the job she wanted, researcher on the Society's new history book, which was called Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, that she hoped that I would be reassigned out of the department because of going into Franz's office, and then she'd get my job. I also came to realize at that time that's why some books assigned to me from the library and other important material I requested disappeared from my office. She had the keys. She had the keys to the offices
So she
because
was trying to jeopardize your position so she could get that position.
and I was responsible for the library books I'd take back to my office. I'd carry a whole bunch like this to my office, and then I'd have them for a month, and I would be poring over a subject, see. So they were disappearing. And sometimes I didn't realize after I had them in 2 weeks, and then I went to use it because I stayed ahead of it. So I didn't have to be in the library every day. And so it was disturbing. I had some very important material that went back to 1945. Every single thing that the Society published and put out there, they had in 1945. It was a piece of paper about this big, and it had names of books and magazines and how much was put out year by year. It disappeared from my office. It
Oh
was
wow.
in my drawer and it was gone.
Oh, wow.
And Carl was not happy about that at all. And because I had to tell him it was gone. So I went to see his brother, Don, who was, like I say, was the overseer, head of the corporation, Pennsylvania Corporation. And this had a lot of figures on it, so I figured maybe he had a copy. And he did, and he made me a copy of it. So I was able to get that. She was so determined to get my job. And when all this came to light, I wrote her a letter. When everything came out, I wrote her I have it to this day. It was very kind, very motherly. And anyway, they removed her right away when they figured out all of this, what she was doing. They sent her to work with her husband where he could watch her. And then they both left Bethel. But I found out years later that she was molested as a child and she was raised by a maiden aunt. So there, what am I going to say? You know, so many people who their past is so mixed up because of child abuse. Sometimes they grow up with a lot of problems. So Carl Adams actually, he explained to me when the fat hit the fan. He said she wanted my job. That's why she caused me to get into trouble by directing me to go into Franz's office. But he said he could not tell me then. He couldn't. I didn't ask. I asked Carl why he didn't appoint Debbie as researcher on the Proclaimers book, in that she was such an excellent writing department staff member. And this is what he said. He said one evening when he and she were working late in their respective offices on the Inside Book project, she knocked on his office door and offered to get him a cup of tea. He said he felt that her actions were too familiar and he didn't like it. And consequently, it was for this reason she did not get the research job on the forthcoming new history book. To tell you that I was astounded at his explanation is to put it mildly. There were times when I was working with him that I thought him extremely eccentric, but I kept my opinions to myself. Overall, Carl was kind to me, very appreciative of my historical fact-finding discoveries while working on the project. Looking back as a new writing department staff member, I wish he had explained the situation immediately after I had visited Franz's office, because I was in a state of turmoil after being scolded by him for going in that office. Even though I told him that Debbie told me to go into that office, she should have been scolded, not me. But he didn't say a negative word about her. That kind of thing, he had his reasons. I got hurt by that. And I knew enough to just be quiet. I remember it like it was yesterday, the jubilation I felt when I received my new assignment to the writing department. That evening, I remember looking out of the window of our room at the large moon in the sky and thank Jehovah in the heavens for the assignment. I recall saying, like it was yesterday, I said, "Why me, Jehovah? Why did I get such a privilege to work in the writing department?" I was simply ecstatic. Shortly after my experience in Franz's office, I remember talking to Jehovah again, saying, "Why me, Jehovah? What did I do wrong to punish me by putting me in the writing department?"
But why was his office such a place of
Well,
I don't
he
know, like
he
what would
had
happen? What happened? You walk into his office.
I
What's
don't
there that
really
you're not allowed to see?
they respected his office so much. They draped their clothes. Like I said, they pandered to him anyway, and he was out of his mind on the last. They used to give him a tape recorder. It was this big, and here he was in the infirmary. He was out of his mind, laying there in bed, and they give him this little recorder, and he would record a talk that he had given years before, word for word. That was he was extraordinary. And then he thought they would say to him, "This is going in the literature." And they kept him happy. There was a boy, a young man, who sat at his bedside all night and all day,
Oh
make sure
wow.
everything was fine. They just
He lived
worshiped.
until he was like 99, right? Am I correct?
So I don't remember how old he was, but I remember a newsman who interviewed him for 1 hour. The only time he ever had an interview by a newsman. And that interview actually appeared in, I believe it was Time Magazine or Newsweek, one or the other. I have a copy of it. And that man came out of that office. I met him years later at a conference of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And that newsman told me, told me about interviewing, because this was when Freddie got the job of president. When Nord died, Freddie got that job. And the Awake editor told me, he said he was so upset that Freddie got that job, he went in to see the head of the writing department, and he said, "Why in the world did you all make him president of this organization when he was responsible for 500,000 people leaving the organization over the 1975 idea, which was his?" And so, but the reporter said to me, he said, "When I left visiting Freddie Franz, he said, I knew that man was certifiably insane." And well, he was an older fellow when he got to be president, but he was looked at as the oracle.
Hmm.
I have been in his company. He had Charles Hayes Russell's desk in his office. He had a whistle. It was Charles Hayes Russell's whistle, because back then they didn't have, when you want to notify someone to come into your office, like your secretary, you just blew your whistle.
Oh my
And
gosh.
and
So he was
Freddie,
a whistleblower.
he was a whistle. Yes. I walked to work with him. He had a guard with him every single day. Same man every day walked to work with him until he couldn't walk anymore. And so just walk by him and chat with him. He was always humorous. He wasn't always quoting scriptures, you know. He was funny. So well, anyway, these are just little people junk, I call it, from back in those years. But I had close friends in the writing department. When we left the Bethel, I'll show you. See this book?
Yeah.
That is full of letters, pages and pages that people wrote to Joe and I, saying wonderful things. They were so kind and so nice. And all of these things, you will be missed by all in the department, says this person. There's probably half of just Joe, all of the plumbing people that worked for him at Bethel. Everybody put in something. For me, it was from engineering. There's all sorts of pages from engineering, even though I wasn't with them anymore. Then there was also from governing body members, people I was very close to. Carl Adams, there's one whole sheet here just of Carl Adams and his wife, and saying kind things and how happy they were that I had been at Bethel. And I say this because last time I was on your program, somebody commented afterwards that everybody hated me in Bethel. Where they got that idea from, I don't know. I have lots of pages here. Carl, the Adams.
Yeah, I want to show that. Hold on a second.
Also, I have Harry Poloyan. That's my overseer for to do with I was his researcher for the Awake.
Okay. So they wrote you a letter basically saying that, oh, I can see it here. It says, Barb, since I worked closely with you in our many projects, I do want to say that you are just the best at what you do. I will surely miss your keen insight and ability to get just what we wanted. You are something else, an unusual combination of deep compassion for others and also excellent ability. And I didn't know there were any other like that. But I guess that makes two now. Rose is the other fooled you, didn't it?
That was his wife. See, he couldn't say I was the best. He has, of course, his
Of
wife.
course, he's got a wife. His wife has to be the best. Yeah. Anyhow, in the new world, we'll have to get together and have a big celebration and remember old times. May Jehovah continue to be with you. So, yeah, it's clearly your exit from Bethel was not something that, oh, the people didn't like you and you didn't do much work over there, or what the accusation was, that you were a busybody getting into everybody's business, and
No, what's
and
what
they
somebody said.
couldn't take you anymore and they got rid of you. I'm like,
I had
who
no
would
time to be
say
a busy.
that? Pardon me?
I said I had no time to be a busybody.
Right, you were doing the research on
Here's
the
one
articles and stuff. Yeah.
Floyd and Melba Berry. There's one here in the picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Okay.
say kind things and wish you well for your future activities. We are sure you will be a great help and comfort to the old folks. And of course, there is always plenty to do in the work of the Lord. It has been a joy to be associated with you in this busy Bethel life, and we especially appreciated the lamb dinner fellowship with you all. I had fixed a lamb dinner, and they were from New Zealand, and they never got lamb. So he mentioned that. May Jehovah blessing go with you and all that you continue to do. And I'm happy that I worked hard for them. I was a believer. That certainly is subjective. I don't say that everybody had to be like me. It was a circumstance in my life. And when I found out the negatives, I couldn't live with the negatives. And
Or got a question for you. Where I don't know what your faith is right now, but when you were a JW, were you considered one of the 144,000? Did you have any hope?
no,
No. Okay.
I was only interested in the kingdom. The woman that I met when she was going door to door, and I was at my girlfriend's house, and she was making a back call back then. And so I talked to her, and she asked me what religion I was. I said Catholic. And this woman had been Catholic before she became a witness. So she started to point out to me the Lord's Prayer, and nobody had explained it before. And she said, "The kingdom come on earth, Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it in heaven."
Yes.
I prayed that. I went to confession. You know, my brother and I get to fighting, so we kids, you know. I went to confession until I converted to the witnesses till I was 14. Um, I was a believer, and she explained the kingdom to me. And I was very unhappy because the world was such a mess. I was Polish, and from Polish stock way back to eternity, I think. And the war, my family was fully involved in World War II. My father loaded the atomic bomb bullet in San Francisco onto the Indianapolis ship. My uncle was Patton's communication man. Patton was General Patton. My relatives from Poland, one of the, I was only 5 years old when a man came from Poland and was sitting in our kitchen with my mother. And he was a colonel, and he was covered with medals. He was a colonel in the Polish army. And he came there to find my mother. He was looking for my mother. He was there on government work with the US government.
Yeah, I
And
remember you mentioned that in the first interview. Yeah, it's quite
so
interesting.
I was primed for the witnesses, and it it was a hope I had. And when I left it because of child abuse, not because of any dogma.
Well, that's what I think. You know, you've been talking for 2 hours right now, but I think this is what we were all hoping that you would tell us. What did you find about the child abuse cases? You know, and tell us more about this. So maybe next time we'll have another interview and we'll discuss the child abuse cases, right, in detail, because I know that subject in itself is another 2 hours. But tell us, what is it? There's one more thing you wanted to mention on this interview.
One thing about being at Bethel, it was an adventure. It was wonderful most of the time, but we all lived a facade. If it's a superficial appearance, it wasn't really real. We found that out as the years progressed. It was just like a facade's appearances are false. Sometimes it's not done purposely, but we were all carrying that facade of how to behave, the magazines were full of instructions how to act. Everything was covered. It was control, and that was the facade was us under control by men who meant well. I believe they meant well, except one man I don't think much of. But generally speaking, we were all believers, but some of them used this And it was a facade. It wasn't true because their work proved it. When I mentioned before about one of them, that half of his articles he wrote wasn't true. When I checked the articles themselves and realized that the assistant to the governing body article, it wasn't, half of that article wasn't true.
Oh, wow.
There were two other major articles that he did that when I checked them, it wasn't true. And I'm not telling his name. He's still alive. I heard he was. He's in his late 80s. And
And was it corrected when you found out that it wasn't true?
way after I found out, way after
Oh, okay.
I was out, when I said, out of curiosity, that was some of the things that I decided to do to, I went out of the organization because of how they handled child abuse, just like the Catholic Church did, as a sin and not a crime. And I couldn't bear it. And the Catholic Church had been doing that for centuries, and they adopted the same exact. When I studied up on this, I found out that they adopted in 1954. They were never, Jehovah's Witnesses were not a religion until 1954, right in that time period. And there was, I can prove it 100%. And when I started studying canon law and started really looking into this, I found out that all of these issues on sin, and even to recent years, bad priests, it was always handled as sin and not a crime until the past, I would say since the 80s, they've been working on changing that, but they got a long way to go. I spoke at the Vatican. They had such problems with child abuse. That's why I was invited to speak there. And of course, I was out of the witnesses. And so,
Yeah,
I know what I'm talking about. I've done
that's
this.
quite a subject. Yeah.
Facts.
But
Facts is what I live by. I don't live by independent truths that are different by everybody.
do
It's
you think there's so-called PIMOs, physically and mentally out, that are living in Bethel?
so what are you asking?
If they're in Bethel, there are so-called PIMOs, physically and mentally
Yes.
out, right? People who are awake, that they don't believe in the doctrines and stuff. They don't believe that Jehovah's Witnesses are real religion. I mean, true religion, and they're in Bethel, still serving, maybe even writing things, or not really.
I wouldn't know that. Some, but they usually leave after a while. They get so discontent unless they don't have a place to go. I knew of a few like that. I didn't know everybody, the thousands of people, how they thought. I could see they would, some of the upper people at Bethel were going through changes mentally. I mean, the year of the United Nations is an example of that, where the peace and security in '84 was proclaimed by the
Yeah,
United Nations. We thought that was it that year. Um, so much came
the end.
out of
Yeah,
it. This, you could go on and on and look at. I was like 84, and look at how many years since '84. Everything they've ever said, just
yeah.
like I said thousands of years ago about the future. Religions have always wanted the future. Uh,
They
with
always said the answer: where we come from, where we are, and where we're going. Right? Every religion has that answer.
That's why I don't really get into discussions of religion, because there's no answers. If you give me an answer, I'm not saying I'm not a believer, or I'm not saying I am a believer. I don't get in wranglers. I'm not a wrangler over religion because it is, to me, it's too subjective.
Yeah.
Is and it depends on who is raised, genetics, all of that
Of
stuff.
course.
Yeah.
I always say faith is actually not a choice. People think it is, it's not. How can you choose faith? How can you choose to believe, in Allah for 1 week and in Trinity for another week, in Jehovah for another week? It's not your choice. You can't choose it, right? Like bread from a store. You're exposed to certain doctrines, you're exposed by the environment, by your teachers, by people who are around you, and your brain rather accepts this as true or not.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
that's it.
I know that some of the older ones who died at Bethel were not believers. I know that for sure. I'm talking about 80s and 90s-year-old because I had conversations with them. It was obvious they didn't believe. One time Joe and I both were taken into the basement by two guys to show us the machine that used to, the watchtower was somebody at the watchtower invented, and it was used in the 30s, I think. And somebody had one of those machines, and you put your hand on and told you your illnesses and everything like that. That was outlawed in the organization, but at one point it wasn't. And the things have come in and gone out, come in and gone out. So, and people say to me, "What's your beliefs, Barbara?" And I said, "Why do you need to know?" I said, my beliefs in $2.50 will get you one way on the subway. What difference does it make? $2.50, pay it.
No.
And my belief adding or subtracting or anything. It's nothing
Yeah.
in your life. So, but I give you facts and experiences, and I try to be fair. Try to be fair. And that's what I wanted to talk about, that great facade.
Yeah.
Here, Carl Adams was a very important man at headquarters. And at one point, he was actually over the writing department. And so somebody very familiar with him, who's not alive, would be Raymond France. And so they knew each other well. And I've been to Ray's when he was alive. Joe and I were at his home and had conversations with Ray. But this facade here's an example of what Carl Adams, how he felt about keeping the facade in the kingdom, in that book, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom. So we all got a copy of it then. It was very important. The Proclaimers book, everybody, 3 years, 4 years, it was important. And then nobody cared about it anymore. But at the time, Carl, he knew what he wanted, and he wanted the facade. And that is this book. Maybe that's why they stopped using it. Maybe there are things in there that didn't prove to be true, that some of the people assigned to work on things in here were believers of a facade, just like what I'm going to say. This is very short. In this book, on page 446, Carl Adams revealed that when...
Go ahead.
Okay. Frank DeWar was going to Siam. The thing about this is I was the one I don't mean to brag, I just ran across Frank DeWar's history in my research and found that he wrote in, he was a missionary for Jehovah's Witnesses, and he had to report in. And when he sent his report in under a certain country, I was going through the paperwork for that country, and I found his experience. So I read his experience. I made a copy of it, and I gave it to Carl. When Carl put it in this book, this is what he wrote. He says, talking about Frank, he made a stopover in Kuala Lumpur until he could get together enough money for the rest of the trip. But while there, he was in a traffic accident. A truck knocked him off his bicycle. After recuperating, Carl wrote, with just $5 in his pocket, he boarded the train bound from Singapore to Bangkok. But with faith in Jehovah's ability to provide, he got on with his work. That was beautiful. That's what is in this book. But that's not the truth.
No.
It's only a part of the truth. Carl loved the facade, and he painted everything with the brush of facade. And and I continue, always concerned about furthering the illusion that the organization appeared to be in the grip of the divine. Carl left out the part of the story that would have fulfilled the promise the publishers of the Witness history book proclaimers made to, quote, in the beginning of this, it says in the very beginning that this book was going to present a candid, C-A-N-D-I-D, candid history. Very open, very true. When Frank wrote about his experiences in Kuala Lumpur, he did not avoid telling it like it was, although Carl Adams did avoid telling it like it was. What was omitted was the human side of the story. Frank was knocked unconscious in the accident and woke up later in a bed in what appeared to be a rundown hotel. Later, he found out he was pulled out of the congested, traffic-clogged thoroughfare by the owner of a brothel, who carried Frank to his house of ill repute, where he was nursed back to health by prostitutes. Including
Wow.
that very human element part of the story would have been truly a candid history. However, this incident did not fit the point of view Carl was trying to convey, so he omitted it. Carl was a prudish and peculiar man. He wasn't really well liked. His brothers were really well liked, but not Carl. That's just the way it was. Carl Adams was very content to live in the insular Bethel world with his smug delusions and unrealistic opinions about the Watchtower organization, and that's reflected in this book. He was the overseer of putting this book together. To Carl, it was not appropriate for readers to know that brothels and prostitutes could possibly fit into the unrealistic picture he painted in a narrative that I found to be full of half-truths and omissions about the modern-day history of Jehovah's Witnesses. The end.
Yeah, the way all the stories are being painted, I'm not saying that they're lying. I'm saying they're omitting very key pieces of information to make it look like, oh yeah, Jehovah will always help you. Jehovah will always take care of you. And that kind of story shows you who helped them. Prostitutes helped them, right? I know tons of stories like that, but they will never admit it. That
Well,
oh,
because
people in the world,
yeah,
especially prostitutes or
are
bottom of the
bad,
bottoms, right?
are bad, right? They're always bad.
Yeah, of course. So
Yeah.
how can you say that these people were better? And I know so many examples of I a friend of mine who was kicked out from his own house when he was 12 years old by a JW father. He survived by going to prostitutes and they helped him, right? They took him in so he wouldn't be on the street. And yet JW parents wouldn't do that, right? And stories like this just boggles my mind,
Yeah.
right? That they would not share these stories because, of course, yeah, Jehovah will always take care of you. And I asked this question actually my sister when she was in Bethel, and I was curious, like I'm still believing JW, right? I was just curious, what happens to a Bethelite who will get sick and will not be able to serve anymore? What happens to them when they get old and they can't do the work that they're doing? And she was working cleaning, even though she was educated and she had university degree, and they put her in cleaning. And I'm thinking, well, there's a moment when she can be replaced like this, one phone call, right? Uh, and I asked her like, what's gonna happen? Like, do you guys retire? You don't retire? What if somebody gets sick and you cannot work anymore? This Bethel, and then she got very uncomfortable, and she just said, "Well, Jehovah will take care of the person," and I'm like, "Yeah, but how?" Well, if Jehovah is the organization, right? Like he's helping through the organization, how is the organization going to help those Bethelites who spent here decades and they can't do anymore? They can't serve anymore for whatever reason. How is the organization helping them? And then she never answered. She just got upset that I asked these kind of questions. Like, how could I ask this? But many people who go to Bethel, they have no idea. They're just thinking, oh yeah, we're just putting our faith in Jehovah, and then they're getting a very different outcome that they were expecting. Right now, I think they changed it. Right now they're like, okay, 5 years, you're out. Right, like a short period of time, because they have a lot of elderly people in Bethel that they have a hard time letting go of, but they can't produce like they used to. Right?
They're very worried,
I
very
believe
worried.
so. Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
did they go?
It is a challenge.
I recently had an experience with a relative who never called. He said, my cousin always shunned me, always, all these years. And all of a sudden, these big changes are coming up. And then, of course, on the 18th, there's going to be an announcement of some sort. So he said, all of a sudden, my cousin calls me. And he's friendly because his cousin's 50 years old. Where does he go if there's a change for, we don't accept 50-year-olds anymore?
Yeah.
That's not what will happen. But whatever it is, people are apprehensive who are there. We didn't have that when we were there. In fact, the organization was so well financed then. The big buildings that they were putting up, there was big money behind that. Huge, huge money. Some of the richest millionaires, multi-millionaires in the organization paid for many of those buildings that Joe worked on that we remodeled. And then eventually when the buildings were finished, the Watchtower then received the building back to them. Because then when I checked, when I was in the engineering department, I was able to see who was the owner of those buildings, some of those, it was not Watchtower. So I'm not critical of that. They did what people do in this,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
but
I'm
they
not
give
critical
the
of that either. I
illusion.
mean,
There's
if they
always
wanted,
that illusion
yeah.
that Jehovah is pulling all the strings. Where was Jehovah when my husband was working on the Standish building? And there were people who were living in the Standish building while the plumbers were changing the plumbing, and everybody who was living there, non-witnesses, were told, don't use your bathrooms. We've got your plumbing all disconnected. And my husband comes home covered with you know what, because the people who were so angry that the Watchtower purchased those buildings, and they were going to, because those were rent controlled buildings by the city. And so here they are owned by the Watchtower. Those people, when their expiration of their that particular sign up was going to expire, the expiration of their rent date would expire, they were furious. And so my husband said, we told them all, don't flush the toilet. We're fixing the plumbing. They flushed the toilet. And he said, we're covered with the stuff. Where was Jehovah at that time? Silly thing. But
Watching his comedy channel.
that was life in the big house.
On this smelly note, we
That's
can
on
finish
that
today.
note, I will say goodnight, and I'll try to get some of my notes out for the child abuse. If anybody has some specific questions,
Yes. Yeah, they
please.
can post it maybe even at the bottom of this of this interview, and post in comments your questions, and we will ask those questions, answer those
I know
questions
the
on the
answer.
next one. Yeah.
I'll give it. If I don't know it, I'm not going to make it up.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, but I'm sure people will
I
have
said,
questions. So
yeah, and I love to share facts as much as you like to hear them.
yes, yes. Maybe you know what? Maybe for the next time, I don't know. Maybe I'll discuss this with you later. Maybe we'll do a live one day so people can actually ask directly. Put
Oh,
it in the chat.
that would be exciting.
That might be interesting. Yeah. So maybe
Yeah,
we'll do the next one like that.
you never know. You know.
Thank you very much, Barb. I mean, loads of information. I really appreciate everything that you're sharing because the stuff that you're sharing is something we were not able to know. And I'm glad that you have such a great attitude towards this because so many people are so bitter. But in Bethel, you loved your work. You saw the people, they were genuinely working there. They were not making money off of it, they were not becoming rich. If they caught somebody, getting a little bit off of the chairs or something like that, right away they got rid of that.
The turnover at Bethel was very big every year, huge, because it
Yeah,
was 85% of Bethelites were
85.
young men.
Wow,
85% were young men. Something like that stat is
that's a lot.
about,
I mean, of course, a lot of them are single, young, and later
yes,
on they want to get married and they want to start a family. So of course they're gonna move forward, right?
or
So
they
I
got in
understand that
trouble.
too.
Like some of them started drinking and then, well, those first time they left home and they were on their own at Bethel. And like I said to somebody, I said, the man who was in charge of the homes, all the homes. And he told Joe and I, he said, every application that ever comes in nowadays, and that's a long time ago, he's now deceased, but he says every application that comes in, there's a question on there. Have you ever taken drugs? He said every application of a young man says yes. And these kids were raised, and most of them were raised. Even they were
What?
curious. Yeah. 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 So
Blows my mind.
It's just people junk,
Yeah.
where did they come from? How about the ones that were drinking so much at a party and then on the way home, they urinated on all of the front doors of about seven um, brownstones before Bethel, before they got to where they were living. They urinated on the front steps. And if that didn't cause them, we heard about it the next morning. And these guys they packed their bags. The society, the men who were over the homes, packed their bags and they were out on the street waiting for the bus after that one. So it's just, first time out of home. It's not that this has anything to do with it being the truth or not the truth. It has to do with humans. And many of those kids are old men now and probably laugh about what the stupid things they did when they were in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I'm laughing at it now. That's
Just,
crazy.
you know,
It is what it is. Thank
it
you
is.
very much, bro. I appreciate it very much. And we'll see each other on the next one.
Yes. Bye.